Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We love to explore all kinds of fascinating topics here, and today we're going to be like financial detectives cracking the code of global
Nah.
currencies.
Woo! I like that, financial detectives.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at what makes some currencies stronger than others. What can we learn from those at the top? What can we see by looking at some of these currencies? It's like a peek behind the curtain of global finance, isn't it?
It is. And it's a topic a lot of our listeners have been asking us to dig into, so
Yeah.
we've got a really interesting source for this deep dive.
Hmm.
It's a conversation between two, I guess you could call them currency enthusiasts.
Okay.
They were going through the latest list of the top 100 strongest currencies in the world and sort of dissecting,
Right.
what makes these currencies tick. So it's
Yeah.
like we're eavesdropping on their conversation,
I love that.
picking up their insights and kind of like unpacking them together.
Very
So
cool.
they started off right at the top of the list with a familiar face, the Kuwaiti dinar.
The Kuwaiti dinar. Of course,
Yes.
yeah. Always up there. And for good reason, right?
Right.
Kuwait, we all know about the oil wealth. It's
Yes.
a classic recipe for a strong currency. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? But I think what's interesting here is it's not just about having oil, it's what you do with it. It's
Oh,
how you manage that wealth. And Kuwait, they've been pretty smart about it, you know? They've diversified their economy, kept inflation under control. It's not just about sitting on a pile of oil.
so they've got kind of that long-term vision.
Exactly. They're thinking ahead. They're building for the future. And that stability, that forward-thinking approach, it really shows in the strength of their currency.
It's interesting because another top performer on the list, the Swiss franc, Switzerland doesn't have oil.
No.
But they've got something else, right?
Yeah.
This reputation for being rock solid, especially when,
Especially when the world feels a little shaky.
yeah, when things are uncertain.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Switzerland's like that friend we all have, right? The one who always keeps a cool head. When things get a little crazy, you can always count on them.
Yeah, the reliable one.
Investors, they feel the same way about the Swiss francs. When there's turmoil in the world, when markets are volatile,
Right.
they flock to the Swiss franc because they know their money is safe there. It's a safe haven. And it's a testament to their stable political system, their incredibly reliable banking system. It's all about trust, isn't it?
hmm Yeah, and it's interesting to see how trust and stability can really play.
A huge role.
Yeah, such a huge role in currency strength. And then,
Yeah.
we come to the US dollar,
Right.
still a major player on the global stage.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But it has slipped a bit in recent years compared to, how it used to be.
Yeah. It's still a powerhouse, but it's not quite the undisputed king that it once was. Makes me wonder what's going on there.
Yeah. Does that suggest like a broader economic shift? Is something happening?
Yeah.
You know?
It's definitely something to watch, right? The dollar has been the dominant currency for decades, but the world is changing. Other economies are emerging, they're gaining strength. There are new investment opportunities popping up all over the place. And then, of course,
And then there's crypto.
crypto. Yeah. It's like someone threw a grenade into the world of finance, and we're all still kind of watching the pieces fall, right?
Yep. It's a wild card.
It's a wild card. Some countries are embracing it, some are cautious. It's going to be fascinating to see how that all plays out.
It really is. And, what about you, listener?
Mhm.
Where do you stand on crypto? Are you dipping your toes in those waters? Are you staying away? It's a really interesting question to consider.
A big question.
But even with crypto making all these waves, we're still seeing some surprising strength from smaller economies. The Cayman Islands, for example.
Okay, yeah.
Their dollar is punching way above its weight class.
Yeah, they're definitely a little power. I mean, when you think about it, they've kind of carved out this really unique niche for themselves. They're like the financial concierge to the world, attracting foreign investment, especially with their tax haven status.
Right.
But it does make you think, how sustainable is that model in the long run? I mean, if the global rules of the game start to change.
Yeah, will they be able to adapt?
Exactly.
It's a good question. It's interesting. We're seeing this theme of diversification,
Yeah.
whether it's oil-rich nations or these specialized economies.
Mm-hmm.
And the source material, also highlighted the rise of some Asian currencies, particularly the Singapore dollar.
The Singapore dollar is a fascinating one. They've really positioned themselves as this major financial hub. Their government is incredibly stable. Their monetary policy is top-notch, very well managed. It's a textbook example of how smart policies, smart governance,
Yeah.
can lead to a strong currency.
So I'm sensing a pattern here. It's like economic stability,
Yeah.
Steady growth, sound governance.
Absolutely.
These seem to be the hallmarks of a strong currency.
Those are the key ingredients,
Yeah.
right? You need that solid foundation. You need a government that's responsible, that's focused on long-term growth, that keeps inflation under control. Those are the things that give investors confidence, and that confidence is what drives a strong currency.
Yep. But the world isn't always predictable, is it?
Yeah.
What about those events that can really send a currency tumbling? Like those, moments that make investors nervous.
Yeah, the curveballs, right? Like those unexpected things.
Exactly.
And one of the biggest ones is political instability. Our sources, they talked a lot about that. I mean,
Right.
think about it. Currency values are built on confidence.
Right.
Anything that shakes that confidence can cause trouble. And political turmoil, corruption, even a messy election, those can really spook investors and send a currency into a tailspin.
It's interesting because, you think about
Yeah.
a currency is just like, this piece of paper
Yeah.
or these numbers on a screen.
Right.
But it's really tied to...
It's so much more than that.
Yes.
So much more. It's a reflection of a country's overall health and stability. It's about trust. It's about perception. It's about believing that things are going to be okay.
Right. And that the future looks good.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just political instability, right? Economic downturns as well.
Oh, yeah.
Recessions, high unemployment.
Those are never good for a currency's health. Think of it like a domino effect. When the economy weakens, people lose jobs, businesses struggle, and that lack of confidence spills over into the currency market. Investors start pulling their money out, and the currency takes a hit.
So it's like this interconnected web of...
It's all connected, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah. The economy, the politics, the currency, they're all intertwined.
And then the sources also talked about these kind of unpredictable events like natural disasters
Oh, yeah.
that can obviously disrupt an economy and send investors kind of like, running for cover.
Absolutely. Those events, they can have a huge impact on a country's economic output. And when the economy suffers, the currency often suffers too.
And they mentioned Venezuela as like, a really extreme example.
Yeah. Venezuela's a tragic case. They had all that oil wealth, but mismanagement, political turmoil, it led to hyperinflation, and their currency essentially became worthless. It's a stark reminder of how fragile things can be, even with vast resources. It's the policies, the decisions that ultimately determine a currency's fate.
So it's not just about the resources themselves.
That's right.
It's about the management.
It's about what you do with them. It's about having a sound economic plan, a stable government, and building that trust with investors. That's what ultimately determines a currency's long-term strength.
Right. It's like a recipe.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about some of the heavy hitters, the Kuwaiti dinar, Swiss franc, US dollar. And we've touched upon some of the things that can make a currency weak. But now I want to shift gears a bit and talk about a currency that has, weathered a lot of storms.
Okay.
The euro. It's interesting because it's this single currency
Yeah.
used by all these different countries, each with their own economic strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
Must be a real challenge to keep it all balanced.
It's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the sheer size of the Eurozone economy, that provides a certain level of stability.
Right.
But managing a single currency across so many diverse economies, that's a constant challenge. That's where the European Central Bank comes in. They're like the conductor of this massive orchestra, trying to keep everyone in sync.
So many different instruments.
So many instruments, yeah. And each one needs to be playing its part for the music to sound good.
Right. And it's interesting because we've got countries that are part of these big economic blocks.
Yeah.
Like the Eurozone. But then you've got countries that are outside of those blocks, and can they still have strong currencies?
Absolutely. Look at Norway, for example. They're not part of the Eurozone, but the Norwegian krone, it's consistently one of the strongest currencies in the world.
Interesting, yeah.
They've got their oil exports, of course, but they also have incredibly sound economic management. They've got this robust sovereign wealth fund. It's like this giant safety net for their economy. They're really playing the long game.
They're thinking ahead.
They are. They're setting themselves up for success.
And it's interesting, to look ahead and think about how events like elections and trade agreements might shake up these currency rankings. I mean, how do you see those things playing out?
Those events can definitely create ripples in the currency market. Elections especially, if they're close or unpredictable, they can introduce uncertainty. Investors don't like uncertainty. It makes them nervous. And that can trigger volatility in the currency markets. Trade agreements, too. A good trade deal can open up markets, boost an economy.
Right.
A bad trade deal can do the opposite.
Yeah, it can really have a ripple effect.
Exactly. So it's all about how those agreements are perceived, how they're likely to impact a country's economic prospects.
So fascinating to see how something like an election or a trade agreement can have this direct impact
Yeah.
on something as seemingly abstract as a currency.
It really highlights how interconnected the world is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Political events, economic trends, even social movements, they can all ripple through the currency market.
Yeah.
It's like this giant, constantly shifting puzzle, and currencies are just one piece of it.
But a very important piece.
A very important piece, because currencies are, in a way, a reflection of a country's overall health and stability. They're a measure of confidence, both domestically and internationally.
So if we want to understand what's happening in the world, we need to pay attention to these currency fluctuations.
Absolutely. They can tell us a lot about the direction a country is heading, the challenges they're facing, and even their potential for future growth.
So we're like deciphering this secret language.
Exactly. And the more we understand that language, the more we can understand the complex forces that shape the world around us.
I love that. So where do we go from here? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, from oil wealth to crypto,
Yeah.
from the impact of inflation to the role of central banks. Like, what's the next layer of this currency onion that we need to peel back?
Well, we've talked about the factors that can strengthen a currency, but what about the flip side? What causes a currency to weaken or even collapse? That's a conversation worth having. And it might surprise you how many seemingly unrelated factors can play a role.
Okay, so now we're going to dive into the dark side of currencies.
Ooh, the dark side.
Yeah, a little bit.
Mm.
What makes them weak, and what are some of the warning signs that a currency might be in trouble? Like, if we're these financial detectives,
Yeah.
what are we looking for?
What are the red flags?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a checkup for a country's financial health, isn't it? And one of the first things you look at is their trade balance. Are they importing way more than they're exporting? That can be a big problem.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense because
It can create this imbalance.
you're spending more than you're bringing in.
Exactly. If a country is consistently importing more than it's exporting, that's a red flag. It's like living on borrowed time. Eventually, that debt catches up to you.
So it's not just about like individual spending habits.
Right.
This is happening on a national scale.
It's happening on a national scale. And if that trade deficit keeps growing, it can create this vicious cycle. The currency weakens, which makes imports more expensive, which fuels the trade deficit even more. It just spirals.
It's like a financial avalanche.
Yeah.
So trade balance, that's one thing to watch out for. What other warning signs should we be on the lookout for?
Well, another big one is government debt. If a country is drowning in debt, it makes investors nervous. They start to question whether that country can actually pay its bills, and that lack of confidence, that can really hurt the currency.
So it's like a trust issue
Yeah,
between a country and,
a trust issue.
and the rest of the world.
That's a great way to put it. Investors need to believe that a country is managing its finances responsibly. If they lose faith, they'll pull their money out, and that can lead to a currency freefall.
Now, our source material, they also mention political instability as a major risk factor.
Oh, yeah. Huge.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Imagine you're thinking about investing in a company, but you hear all these rumors of internal conflicts, maybe some shady dealings going on. Would you feel confident putting your money there?
Probably not, no.
Probably not. The same applies to countries. Political turmoil, corruption, social unrest, these can all scare off investors and make a currency really vulnerable.
So a country's political health,
It's all connected.
is directly tied to its economic health
Yeah.
and ultimately the strength of its currency.
Absolutely. And it's not just about avoiding major crises. It's about creating a stable and predictable environment. When investors feel secure, they're more likely to invest, and that can boost a currency's value.
It's all connected. Now, are there any early warning signs that a currency might be heading for trouble? Like, can we spot these issues before they become full-blown crises?
There are definitely some things to watch out for. One indicator is a country's foreign exchange reserves. Think of it as their emergency fund. These are assets, usually held in foreign currencies like the US dollar or the euro, that a country can use to support its own currency if needed.
So the more reserves a country has, the better prepared they are for those unexpected financial storms.
Exactly. Adequate reserves give a country flexibility. They can intervene in the market if their currency is under pressure. They can reassure investors that they're ready to handle whatever comes their way.
But if a country's reserves start to shrink,
That's not a good sign.
yeah, that's a sign that they might be struggling.
It could be. It might mean they're having to spend those reserves to prop up their currency, or it might signal that investors are losing confidence and pulling their money out.
So definitely something to keep an eye on. What about inflation? We've talked about it as a factor that can weaken a currency.
Right.
But can it also be a warning sign of deeper economic problems?
Absolutely. Think of inflation like a fever. It's a symptom that something might be wrong. Persistently high inflation can indicate underlying issues like excessive government spending, supply chain bottlenecks, or even just a general lack of confidence in the economy.
So it's not just about rising prices.
It's about the underlying cause.
Yeah, it's about understanding what's causing it.
Exactly. You need to treat the underlying condition, not just the symptoms. Now, in addition to economic factors, we also need to consider the impact of global events. Things like wars, pandemics, even political shifts in major economies. Those can all send shockwaves through the currency market.
Yeah, it's like that butterfly effect.
It is.
One event,
One little flap of the wings.
yeah, can trigger a whole chain reaction.
Precisely. And during times of global uncertainty, investors tend to seek refuge in those safe haven currencies.
Like the Swiss franc.
Exactly.
We talked about that earlier.
When the world feels risky, investors want stability and security. And currencies like the Swiss franc and the Japanese yen, they provide that. They're seen as safe bets. So their value tends to increase when things get shaky elsewhere.
So it's all about perception
It's all about perception.
and trust. It makes sense why understanding currencies can give you such a well-rounded view of what's happening in the world.
It's like having a backstage pass to the global economy. You get to see the inner workings, the power dynamics, the anxieties, and the hopes that are driving these financial markets.
Such a great way to put it. Now, we've talked a lot about the big players.
Yeah.
The US dollar, the euro, the Swiss franc.
Right.
But what about the currencies that fly a little bit more under the radar? Any hidden gems out there?
Well, hidden gem might not be the right phrase, but there are definitely some fascinating cases of currencies that punch above their weight class.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. Give me an example.
Let's look at the Jordanian dinar. It's consistently ranked among the strongest currencies, despite the fact that Jordan is a relatively small country with limited natural resources.
Wow, that's surprising. What's their secret?
It's a combination of factors. They've maintained a fixed exchange rate with the US dollar, which provides a lot of stability. They've also implemented some really smart economic reforms, attracting foreign investment, diversifying their economy.
So it's not just about having oil wealth or being a financial hub. It's about making smart choices
It is.
that foster stability and growth.
Exactly. Jordan has focused on creating a favorable environment for investors, and that confidence, it's reflected in the strength of their currency.
It's like a ripple effect. Smart policies lead to a strong economy, which attracts investment,
Yes.
which further strengthens the currency.
It's a virtuous cycle.
It really is. And it demonstrates that even smaller countries can achieve remarkable economic success with the right approach.
It's inspiring, isn't it?
It is.
It shows what's possible when you have that combination of smart policies, sound economic management, and a commitment to stability.
Now, we can't talk about currency strength without addressing the elephant in the room.
What's that?
Inflation. It's been a major concern globally,
Yeah, it's been on everyone's mind.
and it can definitely wreak havoc on a currency's value.
Absolutely. Inflation erodes the purchasing power of a currency, making it worth less over time. And when inflation spirals out of control, it can lead to a complete loss of confidence in the currency, causing it to plummet.
Like we saw in Venezuela.
Sadly, yes. Hyperinflation decimated their currency, leaving it virtually worthless. It's a stark reminder of how important it is for governments to manage inflation effectively.
So how do they do that? What are some of the tools they can use to keep inflation in check?
Well, central banks play a crucial role here. They can adjust interest rates, control the money supply, and implement other monetary policies designed to maintain a healthy level of inflation.
But it's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? Because raising interest rates too high can stifle economic growth.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where you can keep inflation under control without choking off economic activity. And that often requires tough choices and navigating some very complex economic conditions.
Speaking of complex economic conditions, our source material also touched on the impact of global events on currency markets.
Yeah, this can really shake things up.
Yeah.
Those kinds of events, wars, pandemics, major political shifts, they can inject a huge amount of uncertainty and volatility into the market. And when the world feels unstable, investors get nervous.
So they start looking for safer places to put their money.
Precisely. They flock to those safe haven currencies like the Swiss franc or the Japanese yen, driving up their value. It's like a flight to safety when the storm clouds gather.
It's fascinating how global events can have such a direct and immediate impact on something as seemingly abstract as a currency.
It really underscores how interconnected everything is. Political events, economic trends, social movements, even natural disasters, they can all influence the value of a currency.
It's like this giant, constantly shifting puzzle, and currencies are just one piece of it,
One piece of the puzzle, but a very important one.
but very important piece.
Absolutely. Because currencies are ultimately a reflection of a country's overall health and stability. They're a measure of confidence, both domestically and internationally.
So if we want to understand what's happening in the world, we need to pay attention to these currency fluctuations.
Exactly. They can provide valuable insights into a country's economic trajectory, the challenges they're facing, and their potential for future growth. It's like learning to read a secret language that tells you the story of the global economy.
I love that analogy. So where do we go from here? We've covered a lot of ground, from the power of oil to the rise of crypto, from the impact of inflation to the role of central banks. What's the next layer of this currency onion we need to peel back?
Well, we've talked about what makes a currency strong, and we've explored the factors that can weaken a currency. But let's dig a little deeper into those warning signs. What are some specific red flags that might indicate a currency is headed for real trouble?
Okay, so let's talk about those currency red flags. What are we looking for here? What should we be watching out for?
Well, one of the clearest signals is a persistent current account deficit. That means a country is spending more on imports than it's earning from exports.
Yeah.
Kind of like a household that's constantly maxing out its credit cards.
Right, yeah. Not sustainable.
Not sustainable in the long run. And if that deficit keeps growing, it puts downward pressure on the currency. Think of it like a popularity contest.
Right.
If everybody's selling a particular currency, its value is going to drop.
Makes sense. What else should we be watching for?
High inflation can be a red flag, but not always. Remember, it's like a fever. Sometimes it's a short-term response to external factors like supply chain disruptions. But if inflation is consistently high and seems out of control, that's a warning sign that there might be deeper problems brewing, like excessive government spending or a loss of confidence in the central bank.
So it's not just about rising prices.
Right?
It's about what those rising prices tell us about the overall health of the economy.
Precisely. It's like a detective looking for clues. High inflation might be a clue that something else is amiss.
Now, our source material also mentioned political instability as a major risk factor. Can you unpack that a bit more for us?
Sure. Imagine you're an investor deciding where to put your money. Are you more likely to invest in a country with a stable, predictable government or one with constant turmoil and uncertainty?
I'd definitely go for stability, yeah.
Exactly. Political instability can spook investors and make them hesitant to hold that country's currency. It increases risk, reduces the confidence that their investment will be safe.
So political risk translates into economic risk,
It does.
which can directly impact a currency's value.
Precisely. And it's not just about dramatic events like coups or revolutions. Even things like policy uncertainty or a lack of transparency can undermine confidence.
So it's about the overall stability and predictability of the political landscape.
Absolutely. Investors want to feel confident that the rules of the game won't change suddenly and that their investments will be protected.
Now, we've been talking about warning signs, but are there any specific metrics that investors use to kind of assess a currency's health?
Yeah, one key metric is foreign exchange reserves, those emergency funds we talked about earlier. A healthy level of reserves shows that a country can weather short-term economic shocks and defend its currency if needed.
So if a country's reserves are dwindling, that could be a cause for concern.
It could be. It might signal that they're having to deplete those reserves to prop up their currency, which isn't sustainable in the long run.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into the world of currencies. We've explored the factors that influence their strength, the risks that can weaken them, and the warning signs that trouble might be brewing. It's like we've peeled back the layers of this really complex financial ecosystem.
We have. We've seen how it all fits together.
Yeah, and we've learned about oil wealth, safe havens, the rise of crypto, and that crucial role that central banks play. But I think most importantly, we've seen how currencies are more than just, pieces of paper or digital tokens.
Right, they're a reflection of something much bigger.
Yeah, they're a reflection of a country's economic and political health.
They're a story constantly unfolding,
Hmm.
with chapters about stability and growth, but also about risk and uncertainty.
So as we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember from all of this?
Pay attention to the currencies. They can tell you so much about what's happening in the world and where things might be headed. The more you understand currencies, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the complexities of the global economy, both in your personal finances and in your understanding of global events.
That's a great point. Thanks so much for joining us on this currency adventure.
It's been my pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed the deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.